to say, though, I think it's a triumph for free speech. I know that's a controversial thing to say in this building.
I mean, you're supposed to be the free speech channel that was always billed as a free speech channel by Andrew Neil when the channel was set up, and now you're saying, well, actually it's controversial for the rest of the channel for me to actually believe in my principles loudly and in front of them, which have been specifically touted as the supposed actual values of the channel right from the fucking start. So Gary Lineker has won. He is the victor after days of completely ridiculous and quite farcical discussion on something that really shouldn't be an issue. I covered all of the different opinions on this issue in my previous segment on this channel. But now that there has been a humiliating climb down from the BBC, we should probably have a follow-up segment on this one, okay? So we're going to go look at the BBC article on this one, just for posterity here. Gary Lineker to return to match of the day as BBC's Tim Davie denies the obvious climb down that we can all see, right? We all know this humiliating climb down because, you know, the entirety of the people the BBC would never have tried to take him into this position in the first place. Did they not want to undermine his ability to be able to speak his own mind freely in his personal capacity? When, as we all know, the BBC guidelines currently are, if you're only considered to be making something that's in breach of impartiality if you're doing it within your own remit of whatever role it is you have with the BBC as a freelancer, which Lineker didn't do because he's a sports presenter, right? And we all know that it was never being taken seriously with regards to partial comments, made by, for example, Andrew Neil on Twitter, who's also a freelancer, who works not in the sports capacity, but in the political capacity, making his right-wing political opinions on social media, right? Gary Lineker will return to present Match of the Day after he was taken off air following an impartiality row in which he criticised the government's new asylum policy. BBC Director General Tim Davie, who was previously head of Fulham Conservative Party and run as a Conservative candidate, who definitely is in no way compromised on impartiality, has announced an independent review will be carried out on social media guidelines. So what they're going to try and say is that, okay, well, we may be climbing down on disciplining Gary Lineker over something that was already him doing something he was already allowed to do within his current contract and current rules. What we're going to do is, now that we've lost the rules, now we've lost based on the previous rules that were there, we're now going to change the rules, right? It's typical conservatism, typical Tories, who, as soon as they realise that they don't win based upon the existing rules, they'll just change the rules so the next time that they can win, right? It's like, it's gerrymandering, essentially. Lineker said he backed the review and looked forward to getting back on air. He said the last few days have been surreal and thanked people for their incredible support. It's interesting as well, I actually retweeted Gary about this, and that is that, he was very magnanimous in the resolution of this, which I think is it's admirable, right? When he tweeted out about this. After a surreal few days, I'm delighted that we've navigated our way through this. I want to thank you all for your incredible support, particularly my colleagues at BBC Sport, for a remarkable show of solidarity. In the words of my R2C, like a communist at the very communist current Kremlin. Football is a team game, but the backing was overwhelming. I've been presenting sport on BBC for almost 3 decades, and I'm immeasurably proud to work with the best and fairest broadcaster in the world. I cannot wait to get back in the Match of the Day chair on Saturday. A final thought. However difficult the last few days have been, it simply doesn't compare to having to flee your home from persecution or war to seek refuge in a land far away. It's heartwarming to have seen the empathy towards their plight from so many of you. Wonderful. Could not have put it better myself.
Fucking neoliberalism.
Terranax87 with a gifted sub. Thank you. Welcome to the Justice Stream. Always appreciate the support. As always. I think it's even in the wake of him being able to completely fucking mock the BBC for their, how he's basically humiliated them over the past few days, right? Even after all of that, he will still go back to the main thrust of this issue, which isn't what an ex-footballer said on his Twitter account, but is actually the overall effect of this, quite frankly, ridiculous and inhumane new asylum bill that's being read in the House of Commons today. You might even say that he put the boot in. Oh, come on, voice. Right, I was doing okay this morning. So dealing with conservatives is like dealing with a spoiled child who makes up every rules every time they lose a game. Literally, that's literally it, right? Like how JDM always points out in my chat. about how the main rule of conservatism is that they must be, the reason for rules is to have one group which the rules protects but does not bind, and for the other group have rules that it binds but does not protect. And that's simple. That's the conservative worldview in essentially in a nutshell. And it's been exposed by the Gary Lineker situation, where they fundamentally, they never opposed cancel culture, they never opposed they never supported free speech. They supported no cancel culture for them and free speech for them, and not for anybody else. That's all they cared about. It was never ever a real political opinion or philosophy that they believed in, and it's been exposed by this whole situation. We literally had my R2C before saying what leftists have always been saying about cancel culture the entire time. It's just a consequence of breaching guidelines, except in this case the guidelines weren't even fucking there. Conservatives are very emotionally immature. That's very true. Starmer missing an open goal here, Harry Kane style. Labour are still saying that what Gary Lineker said about the asylum bill about the immigration bill is wrong. And I'm just like, this is pathetic. Like, the real opposition has now become Stephen Flynn and the SNP. But actually opposing this on humanitarian grounds rather than calling it inefficient or financially unviable or whatever it is, whatever fucking triangulation line that the Labour Party front bench has decided to up with here. Absolutely pathetic, absolutely pathetic. And then spinning on a fucking dime as soon as they realised public perception was in favour of Gary Lineker. But on Monday, after a week of disruptions to its sports shows, the BBC have continued to face criticism from a range of sides. Tory backbench MP and GB News presenter, Philip Davies, told the Mail Online that the BBC's decision was a pathetic capitulation to Lineker, based, and that the end of the licence fee, well, ex-Cabinet Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg also warned the licence fee has passed its sell-by date. Interesting. We're, 5 paragraphs down in this BBC article, and they're already discussing random Tory MPs talk about ending the licence fee, rather than a discussion over the actual policy that's involved here. That's ridiculous framing, right? Why is it immediately, the first comments that they are presenting in this BBC article about what's happening here are from genuine political partisans who are trying to shoehorn in a different issue into something that wasn't even there in the first place. It's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. They're fundamentally trying to frame this as an issue of the licence fee. This is on the BBC. This is your job. This is your future funding that you're putting at risk here with this ridiculous biased reporting. What the fuck is going on? Labour Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell, meanwhile, said the return of Lineker was welcome, but said much bigger questions remain about the impartiality and independence from the BBC from government pressures. The ongoing uncertainties around the future of the BBC are keeping it over a barrel and making it susceptible to political campaigns orchestrated by ministers, MPs, and the right-wing press. I mean, you might, why are we including any of this stuff when we should be talking about the issue that's actually at hand here? This saga should prompt the government to examine how it protects and promotes a truly independent and impartial BBC. Or how about we have an actually independent and impartial BBC based upon the prescriptions that were laid out in the 2019 Labour manifesto? But, that thing's been now put into the gutter by the current Labour front bench, so I guess we're not going to revisit that anytime soon. Ex-BBC News executive Sir Craig Oliver, who went on to be a Downing Street communications chief under then Prime Minister David Cameron, described the situation as a total mess and said it was the wrong choice to have asked Lineker to step back in the first place. It's interesting how, even in the 2010 era, Conservatives are all having a reasonable take on this issue. But I can't ever back these people because you may have a reasonable comment on the BBC suspending Gary Lineker for a week, but you still supported austerity, so I can't like you. Like Caroline Noakes on Times Radio, was it Simon Ashfield as well, wherever it was, Simon Ashford saying, "Oh, I'm not going to vote for the immigration bill." And I was like, "Oh my god, base Tories with a sense of morality, as if they didn't vote through the democide of 300,000 poor people from 2010 to 2016." Today's Good Tory update. I've been saying this whole Lineker thing is a win-win for the Tories because they hate the BBC, and we're not talking about the bill itself. 100%. 100%. And that's why Gary Lineker was correct in his tweet to say that the important thing that we should be discussing is the bill. The bill is the main point of contention here. And this was obviously always a really ridiculous sideshow that took us away from the real argument at hand. And the fact that they've not even included that particular tweet in this discussion here and have immediately taken into a discussion over the people who work at the BBC or the fucking licence fee is ridiculous framing. Speaking to the BBC, he said, "The reality is the BBC today has announced it will have a review of its social media guidelines. In fact, it needs a review of how it handles crises like these." How? Well, here's a wild claim, right? The guidelines were fine already, right? The guidelines were absolutely fine. But Gary Lineker, Andrew Neil, Alan Sugar, whoever they are, no matter how ridiculous their points of view are, they should be able to air them in their personal capacity on social media, right? I am not going to claim that Alan Sugar's portrayal of Jeremy Corbyn as being as like a Photoshop next to Hitler is acceptable in any way. Should that mean he should lose his contract with the BBC? No. It's not tweeting in the BBC's capacity. It was tweeting in his personal capacity. I can't give a shit, right? I will mock Alan Sugar for being a massive wanker because he is one. I'm not going to try and, end The Apprentice's run on BBC because he said something in his personal capacity that was politically partisan or ridiculous. Like, I just genuinely don't even care. Like, Lineker is a rich shitlib who played a significant part in bringing about our current situation by not using his inconsiderable platform to campaign against Corbyn. This tweet was cool and based, though. Well, yeah, exactly. Like, it shows the amount of political partisanship on the behalf of the liberal media that they never, ever, ever complained about, Lineker criticising Jeremy Corbyn. And now we're having this massive kerfuffle over him criticising Suella Braverman. It's simple as that. Like, in the left are always seen by everybody, liberals and conservatives alike. The left are always seen as legitimate targets for this stuff. When, as soon as a liberal gets criticised for this kind of, it's suddenly it's all up in the air. It's rolling news cycle for fucking 3 days. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And quite frankly, all the centrists, right? All those centrists that cheered on the ridiculous McCarthyism of 2015 to 2019, you got what you wanted, and I hope you enjoy your imminent fucking purge that you really do deserve. Like, tough shit. But yeah, the guidelines were already fine. The guidelines didn't need to change. The BBC should have just not said fucking anything and shouldn't have suspended him. Guidelines were fine. The BBC acted poorly. Right? Simple as that. Don't suspend people for tweeting out their opinions. Simple as that. It's not a difficult position to hold. Whatever emerges will be unsatisfactory to a significant number of people. It's inevitable. It's not a remotely a problem solved. It's a problem shelved for the time being. Earlier, Davey insisted he had not backed down in the face of uproar over the star suspension. The problem is that the reason why the problem that's been created is because they suspended him in the first place when they never should have done, in the wake of guidelines that didn't say that they should suspend him, and guidelines that were fine, based upon their current prescriptions. Earlier, Davies insisted he had not backed down in the face of an uproar over the star suspension. He said he took proportionate action, adding, "We believe we did the right thing. I think I did the right thing." And this is the same guy, when interviewed on another news channel, when asked if he would also take the same action if Gary Lineker was being supportive of the new immigration bill, right? He said he wouldn't comment on hypotheticals, right? He couldn't even have the Billy Big Bollocks to come down here and stand by his principles for the other team. It's so obvious it's politically partisan. It's nonsense. Fiona Bruce stepping down as an ambassador for a domestic violence charity over the Stanley Johnson comments. Lol, I say Lamau. Again, I can't believe that people are going to be facing consequences for their actions. How ridiculous is that? On Monday, Tim Davies said, "Everyone recognises that this has been a difficult period for staff, contributors, presenters, and most importantly our audiences. I apologise for this." After announcing he'll return to presenting on BBC TV, Lineker tweeted, "However difficult the last few days have been, it simply doesn't compare to having to flee your home from persecution on war to seek refuge in a land far away." I'm not going to put this in extra context, right? Just going to say it there, right? And they're happy to have this ridiculous discussion of the BBC, apparently. And Tim Davies should go. He should go. He should quit. This entire thing has completely exposed the BBC for the internal partisan leanings that it has. And Robbie Gibb, Richard Sharp, Tim Davies, they should all fucking go. Be replaced by independents. Simple as that. Simple as that, right? To be fair, though, Jim, she only did it the one time. True. Yeah, this whole situation was only made difficult because the BBC decided to suspend Lineker in the first place. They could have just completely fucking ignored him, ignored the baying crowd of Muppets or arguing for him to get like deplatformed or whatever. Like they always complain about leftists doing. Like they could have just not bowed to the pressure, and this would have been forgotten the next day. Completely forgotten. They've created their own mess by a ridiculous application of rules that didn't even exist in the first place. We should keep an eye on those guidelines, get the feeling they're about to gag their employees with that rewrite. Well, 100%, 100%, right? Instead of saying, we apologise and we're sorry for not applying our guidelines fairly and allowing Gary Lineker the ability to be able to tweet freely in his own private capacity, saying, no, we're going to update our guidelines to make sure that every single person who works for us cannot tweet in their official capacity anymore, in the private capacity anymore. The woke lefties of women and girls fleeing domestic abuse. True. In fairness, about 90% of BBC senior management need to go and be replaced by people immediately out of education. Well, definitely. But unfortunately, people just leaving the education system at the moment to the left of Chairman Mao, apparently, according to people on the right. So that will be seen as being politically partisan. If they'd have ignored it, we wouldn't have had us talk about Lineker, but instead possibly had to talk about Braverman's rhetoric. True. Imagine that. Imagine a world where we're actually having a discussion around the actual bill in question, or the things leading up to the bill in question. Fucking hell. Imagine that world rather than talk about sports presenters' tweets. BBC employees are expected to remain impartial on political matters and must follow strict social media guidelines, but there's a significant debate about how they should apply to staff outside of news. Well, he's not a BBC employee, he's a freelancer. Lineker said he'd back to the independent social media review, which Davies said will have a particular focus on how these guidelines apply to freelancers outside news and current affairs. When, we look at the way these guidelines are supposed to be, and it's supposed to only be in their actual capacity. And he's a sports presenter. It's obvious, it's open and shut. Open and shut case. Shortly, the BBC will announce who will conduct that review, Davies said.
Fucking
now and when
neoliberalism.
Michael RCH with the membership. Welcome to the Justice Stream. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for the support. It's always appreciated. And you can become a member for 99p for YouTube viewers. It's click the join button in the down there part. For 99p, you can support the channel. Between now and when the review reports, Gary will abide by the editorial guidelines. That's where we are. Okay. The rest of it's all about Match of the Day. Davey added, Gary is a valued part of the BBC, and I know how much the BBC means to Gary, and I look forward to him presenting our coverage this coming weekend, blah, 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 blah. This is absolutely humiliation for the BBC. Absolute humiliation. And well-deserved humiliation. So yeah. Well done, Gary. And that quite frankly is the result that we wanted. And I'm gonna absolutely love watching like the rightoid media reaction. In which case, fuck it, I'm gonna try and find some rightoid media reaction to this. Oh yeah, if your father's a rightoid, he's gonna be seething. He's absolutely seething in the wake of this. Oh my god. In which case, let's react to some rightoid reaction to this, because we all know, right, that the main purpose of this channel, as I've always said many times, people keep telling, oh, left-wingers don't want to engage with opinions they don't agree with. Fuck it. I'll spend my entire time reacting to rightoids having their stupid takes, and to be fair, it also goes viral on TikTok, so expect to see clips from this later on TikTok, maybe. Let's have a look. To the point, on GB News, Gary Lineker untouchable as BBC reinstates Match of the Day host.
Breaking news, as we thought, Bev, Gary Lineker is back this weekend. The BBC have caved in completely. He'll be back on air after just one weekend.
I've not seen any rightoids across the pond react to this. I know Hassan reacted to it. You're right, Kevin. How you doing? Good to see you in chat.
And off-air, the Director General, Tim Davies, says he's a valued part of the BBC. We know how much the BBC means to Gary. I look forward to him presenting our coverage this coming weekend. Their fig leaf, to cover their embarrassment, they're launching an independent review into social media with a particular emphasis on freelancers. Like
again, this is Andrew Pearce, right? Andrew Pearce's job is being a commentator, and he's literally fucking, like, soporifically dull in his delivery. Who's watching this? Who's engaged by this? How is this man's job? What the fuck is going on? Why are all of them completely uncharismatic? What's going on?
I can tell you how much the BBC means to Gary Lineker. It means 1.35 million quid a year. That's what the BBC means to Gary Lineker. I have to say, though, I think it's a triumph for free speech. I know that's a controversial thing to say in this building, but I don't want to live in a world where presenters...
What I mean, you're supposed to be the fucking free speech channel. That's what was billed as a free speech channel by Andrew Neil when the channel was set up. And now you're saying, well, actually, it's controversial for the rest of the channel for me to actually believe in my principles loudly and in front of them, which have been specifically touted as the supposed actual values of the channel right from the fucking start. It's so pathetic. They have no principles, apart from apparently this woman. Apparently this woman does have principles, which you can't say for apparently she's admitting the rest of the people who work at GB News don't agree with.
Are we here at GB News, we have quite a liberal social media policy to some degree, but we still have to observe.
But we're not funded by the taxpayer to the tune of nearly £4 billion a year. If you
Tell us who you are funded by, Andrew. Tell us who does fund you. Who are you funded by, motherfucker?
got a TV, pretty much you have to pay for the licence fee. You used to, if you're over 75, you could get it free. A lot of 75-year-olds would be very offended by what Gary Lineker said. But
if it'd been in, this is the thing. What I don't, we've got to guess. We talk about this.
Right.
I think we've got to.
I always say that conservatism is just the awkward alliance between business and bigotry, and fascism is the inevitable result. True, so true. We're just funded by dark money, which is totally better. That's why now, again, it's why they're allowed to be. It's why they are allowed and incentivized to be politically partisan, both in the coverage and on social media, because they are just paid to essentially spout the opinions of Marshall Wace and Legatum. As simple as that. It's not Qatar, my rant. It's the UAE, but same difference.
A guest here. Charlie Beckett is joining us now, Professor of Media and Comms at the London School of Economics. Good morning, Charlie.
Good morning to you.
Good morning. So we have all this fuss, we have all of this noise, it's all the front page of the papers for days, and then the BBC say he can come back on after missing one Saturday and they're going to look at their social media policy. Is this the right outcome for this?
I think it is, actually. I mean, I was predicting this throughout the controversy, actually, but I thought it was extraordinary that the BBC had stumbled into this controversy. And I think the good news for everybody, really, is, as you mentioned, that Lineker is able to say what he...
So the BBC should just tell boomers whatever they want to hear. Unironically, that's what these people genuinely think. They genuinely think that. Again, because they fundamentally believe that they are the voice of the silent majority. When they're not. They're an incredibly vocal minority.
He feels. And the BBC has learned a valuable lesson, which is don't overreact when... right-wing newspapers and right-wing Tory MPs get cross about something that a freelancer has said. And Andrew's quite right about the fig leaf of this impartiality review or inquiry, but it's also quite necessary because the rules just didn't make sense, or at least the way that Tim Davie had interpreted the rules.
I mean, I can't believe they got an expert onto GB News and he's telling them that, yeah, the issue with this is the right-wing press trying to bully the BBC into being right-wing by continually smearing it with half-truths. Wow, I can't believe that we're getting some truth from GB News. They clearly picked the wrong guy for editorial line on this one.
Rules just didn't make sense that, somehow Gary Lineker was going to be censored. I mean, he's a sports presenter talking about a general news issue on his social media, and yet other people have said other controversial things and didn't get silenced. It's very important that, people, the BBC journalists, especially the political journalists, are seen to be impartial, because that's what's different between them and GB News. GB News, wonderfully, famously, is very partisan. And, as Andrew said, we don't...
Oh, they won't like that. They're supposed to be the People's Channel. Oh, they won't like that.
Pay a licence fee for GB News, so that's all fair enough. But the BBC stands out from all the other stuff because it tries, at least, to represent all the views of all the people that pay that licence fee.
You mentioned the licence fee, Charlie. We had Jacob Rees-Mogg on just a moment ago saying, in his view, the licence fee has to go. This whole episode confirms why, because if the BBC is nothing, if it isn't about impartiality, do you see the days are numbered for the licence fee, and should they be?
No, I think this lesson means the opposite. And I think Andrew quoting Rees-Mogg on the BBC is hilarious. He's probably the least impartial person I can think of when it comes to talking about journalism in general, let alone the BBC. And I think it actually proves the opposite, that however incompetent this episode has been, I think it shows that their intentions are good.
The thing is, though, he's a professor at university, so he's been captured by the woke. He's a woke Marxist from the universities. The woke Marxist academic that's definitely not coming here to, Spread cultural Marxism.
That they are trying to be relatively objective in a very wicked world where there are lots of partisan people, lots of conspiracy theorists, as Bev mentioned, lots of misinformation out there, and the BBC is at least trying. And if you go anywhere else in the world, you will be hearing people saying how much they wish that they had a kind of boring but balanced broadcaster like the BBC.
I'm sort of fascinated when we're talking about this issue and how the political left and the political right meld together in this particular conversation, because you've got the chair of the BBC, Richard Sharp, who is a Conservative. You've got the Director General of the BBC, who literally stood as a Conservative councillor. We've got Gary Lineker accused of being left-wing in not supporting Suella Braverman, but we've got the most left-wing Conservative government in living memory with the highest tax bill of 70 years.
What? The most left-wing Conservative government? I mean, the one that's trying to criminalise refugees and take away people's slavery protections? What? I'm like, do you know that there's more? There is more to the left-right dichotomy than just how high the tax burden is. The reason why the tax burden is so high is because there's no other source of income for the government. Because the neoliberal era, this incredibly right-wing era, sold off all of our public assets. Like, there's an argument, right? There's an argument to say that on policy, economically wise, right, they've moved slightly to the left of where they were in the David Cameron era. But that period was the Boris Johnson era, where we actually had an anti-austerity era, and now we're into the austerity period all over again, now with Rishi Sunak in charge. What the hell is going on? A genuine parody, absolute parody here. Budget Day's Wednesday, Jim, which I will be covering. Like, literally, we have the government is so like right-wing currently that we have junior doctors going on strike, we have nurses going on strike, teachers going on strike, rail workers going on strike, mail workers going on strike, bin workers going on strike, airport workers going on strike, barristers going on strike. Like, what? The problem with conservatism is that you eventually run out of public assets to sell off. True. So true. So true. But again, Richard Tice was on the same show saying that the Conservatives are socialists at the end of the day because they fundamentally believe that the only thing that determines socialism is, as Kath points out in chat, is when the government does stuff. Austerity and high taxes, the best of both worlds. Love it. To pay our ridiculous defence bill. That they want to fucking expand.
Years. I can't see a true Conservative amongst a lot of them, Charlie. So is the left-right distinction even relevant? Does it help this conversation?
I think you're spot on. And I think that's one of the problems with this idea of impartiality. The old-fashioned idea of impartiality was, look, if I got Andrew on a programme, I had to get somebody from the left on the programme, and then it was all sorted. But I don't think it works like that anymore. Issues, even an issue like, asylum and refugees, doesn't fall neatly into a left-right or even a Conservative Labour or party political spectrum, does it?
What I will say, though, he is right in saying that the issue of immigration, right? The issue of immigration is not something that falls in a left-right dichotomy in the slightest. That's fundamentally true. I believe he is correct when he says that. But the issue of whether or not take away people's slavery protections based upon their nationality is a left-right dichotomy. Again, it's the same kind of historical revisionism from the people who say that the Nazis were left-wing, for example, right? No. I'm sorry. If you are the kind of nationalist who is going to make distinctions about who gets human rights based upon their country of birth, for example, or whether or not they're a refugee or fleeing war or not, you are right-wing. That is a right-wing opinion. It can only be a right-wing opinion. Please stop this. Please stop this right now. Right now.
It's much more confusing. And therefore, when we talk about impartiality, it's much harder. Impartiality never meant that you had to be balanced or neutral all the time. It just meant that you had to try, at least, to reflect different views. So I'm not bothered that there's a Tory who's the chairperson of the BBC, that we've had Labour people who chair the BBC. But
and again, yeah, they are right-wing high taxes as well, because as I was pointing out early in the stream, the taxes are being put on working people rather than on the bourgeois, right? You're taxing workers, whether it be through higher taxes, through higher basic rates of taxation or national insurance, for example. Yet you're not taxing capital gains. You're not taxing dividends, for example, which is how rich people make their money. So even with the high tax burden is on the working people, on the proletariat.
It's how they act. And I think what's compromised it is the particular scandal around Sharp and him not being entirely transparent about his mate Boris and how he helped him get a loan. That didn't help. But the fact that they're political doesn't matter. I worked at the BBC for 10 years, and I was a member of a party. And I'm sure Andrew can guess which party.
Yes, I think I can.
I think you can, Andrew, yeah, but it didn't affect it. In fact, it pushed me the other way. I strove all the time to counter my own biases, partly because it's much more interesting, but it also makes for much more interesting journalism, much more reliable journalism.
That's probably why a lot of the content that I do is responding to right-wingers, right? A lot of the content that I make is bringing up right-wing stuff and then reacting and responding to it. That's far more interesting than me just watching, left-wing content going, yes, I agree, well done.
I think people at the BBC at least try to do that.
Can I ask as well about Gary Lineker? I mean, in a sense, we shouldn't make it about the individual, but he is such a big figure. In a sense now, this will make him almost untouchable.
Well, I don't think so. I think that I think Gary actually, I don't know.
The debt raised to cover the welfare system used to subsidise low wages. True. It's so true, Bilderberg, right? In work benefits being the 40% of universal credit claimants, 100%. Yes, you're absolutely right. The ways in which they're using an incredibly high tax burden, the incredible huge amounts of quantitative easing, and it's all going to the fucking rich. That's why it's right wing, right? If there was actual redistribution, if the Gini coefficient was going down, right, to try and redistribute wealth, then you might call it left wing. But you can't just say that high taxes are left wing as a de facto when we're using this high taxation to be able to pump money into the pockets of rich people and to subsidize the fact that people are being paid starvation wages.
Personally, but my sense he is a thoughtful person, and I think he realizes that, as Spider-Man would say, with great power comes great responsibility.
And when you're right, 255, you're absolutely right. Destroying currency can help the economy sometimes. That's what a budget surplus is. A budget surplus is taxing to destroy currency, to reduce the money supply.
Bev mentioned how much he earns there, but he could actually earn a lot more money if he went to commercial channels. So I think he values the BBC and the authority.
If you ever watched Sam Seedy, he kept debating people on the right to get into the algorithm on YouTube. I would love to debate people on this channel. I'd love to debate people, but there's an issue. I don't want to look like I'm clout chasing if I'm debating people who are bigger than I am. I mean, if, again, rightoids want to come on and debate me, feel free. Love to hear it, love to see it, but I doubt it will happen. Or even liberals. I'd love to debate fucking Starmer stands. Those are actually people I most want to get on the channel are Starmer stands, because those are the people who actually don't have any principles at all. So it's really easy to beat them and really easy to show how hypocritical that they are. Whereas at least right wingers have fundamental beliefs that they actually believe in and want to be able to see put forward. Even if I think that they're abhorrent and negative utility or whatever, at least they believe in it. Whereas Starmer stands literally have no principles at all that they believe in whatsoever. Like, I'd love to get Reem Ibrahim or Jess Gill onto debate, or Darren Grimes, for example. Obviously, Darren Grimes, because now Darren Grimes has got nothing to do apart from his his YouTube channel funded by Lance Foreman's son, who funds Turning Point UK. Maybe Darren Grimes will be in the place to debate me on this channel, but unfortunately, I think that it's unlikely that any of these people want to step up to the plate.
Authority that gives him, actually, and I think he realizes he's got to balance that with a little bit more thoughtfulness about what he says.
Well, he hasn't done that before, has he? Charlie, there's been quite a lot of these texts and tweets in the last 5 or 6 years, and each time he seems to have been emboldened. I think this might make him emboldened even more.
Well, let's see. I doubt it, to be honest. I think this one particularly.
Darren Grimes is technically still a thing, Kath. So Darren Grimes got sacked from GB News because his show had poor ratings. But he now has 2 YouTube channels. He has his own YouTube channel, Darren Grimes Voice of Britain, which is self-funded, I believe. And he also has Reasoned UK, which he set up with seed money from Oliver Anisfeld, who still funds it today. He's the son of Lance Foreman. But Darren Grimes has taken a step back. It's now presented by Jess Gill, who is like a famous TikToker, right-wing TikToker from Manchester. And they've also got a couple of other people on that do reporting. They do like Vox Pop interviews in the street, because that's good for content nowadays. But not good enough for content for them to get more than like 2K views on videos that they post for their YouTube channel with like 80,000 subscribers, for example. Starmer stands would need to do a quick poll or focus group before they could take any positions during the debate. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I don't want to get too much into the sort of Godwin's law problem around, Germany in the 1930s and comparisons with governments now. I don't think it is particularly a good tactic. But what he actually tweeted wasn't entirely wrong. I just think he has to ask himself, was that the best way to express his sympathy with asylum seekers? And it probably wasn't.
No. OK, Charlie, thank you. Professor Charlie Beckett there from the London School of Economics. You know, it's interesting, with Gary Lineker being on that £1.35 million BBC salary, he also probably makes that and more from his commercial deals. Yeah. It's very unusual.
But literally, they can't engage with any of the points. They're like, well, that was an interesting interview where somebody blew apart all the right-wing perspective on this. Anyway, back to Gary Lineker's salary that we actually want to talk about, which is not anything to do with any other point here.
In being a BBC character who is still allowed.
Yeah, and Alistair Campbell, who of course was all over the media this weekend, Tony Blair's former spin doctor, about what an outrage it was. He does a podcast, and whose company produces that podcast? Gary Lineker. He's got a finger in so many pies, and he's also a commentator, I think, on BT Sports. So why the BBC paying so much money is beyond me.
That is the most pertinent.
Yeah, it is interesting that Alistair Campbell is paid off by Gary Lineker as part of the liberal industrial complex, right? For example, it's interesting how we're having this discussion about who pays for Gary Lineker pays to produce political podcasts, yet we don't have the same discussion on who funds GB News, right? Who funds the IEA, for example. We don't have any of these discussions, or at least it's not presented that way on GB News. They're not going to tell us about Legatum or Marshall Wace, are they, for example, right? We're not going to have a discussion on where all the dark money goes into all of these AstroTurf, Tufton Street projects like the LGBT Alliance or Save Our Statues, or the Centre for Policy Studies, or the YouTube channels like Reasoned UK and Darren Grimes and all that lot, right? Why do we never have these Turning Point UK? We never have these discussions, but they're very happy to say, oh, hang on, Gary Lineker has a podcast that he pays for, that he funds, which has Alistair Campbell on it. Which, yeah, that's a reasonable criticism to make about Alistair Campbell, and not about whether or not Lineker should be able to say things on social media. You might have seen something from Jess Gill. It was pretty bad. I reacted to her. I did a stitch of hers with some of her content on TikTok. You might have seen that. I'm not sure. She was trying to say, go to my TikTok if you want to see it, future YouTube viewers. I have responded to Jess Gill before. And actually I've reacted to her on this channel as well. She was a commentator on GB News calling the Conservatives socialist, for example. If you drop in my YouTube videos, there is a segment where it was her and Reem Ibrahim with Michael Portillo on GB News saying the Conservatives are socialist because that's when the government does stuff. Gary Lineker had James O'Brien had a good take on Lineker. I'm not saying that, I know I dislike O'Brien 100%, but I don't think that everything that he says is going to be wrong, and he does have good takes. It's a shame the rest of the media has to almost follow the trawler like seagulls, an agenda set by the biggest beast in the jungle. After Gary Lineker was criticised for saying that the government's language around migration is similar to language used in the 1930s Germany, James Ryan addressed the reasons behind the backlash. He is correct in that the right-wing media set the narrative on this one to try and pull people's opinions away from the actual discussion at hand. And it was the Trojan horse was very obvious. Yeah, I think you're right, Comrade Jock, and James O'Brien would be right to point that out. Well, exactly. It's super weird how the right wing are criticising Lineker for earning lots of money, as if that's not all what they do and or want to do. Like, come on.
We've agreed, both Bev and I know nothing about football. We'll do it for a tenth of the fee.
That'd be terrible. OK, we can also be joined now by former Leeds United Managing Director David Hay.
If you're right wing, you fully believe in what I was speaking before about the free market, right? And how the 1.3 million figure is the market. There's the going market rate for Lineker's salary if you want to keep him there, rather than him going off and doing something at Sky Sports or whatever. Like that's how, in your mind, wages should be supposed to work. Yeah, Gary Lineker was manufacturing the wrong type of consent. Yeah, exactly.
Give us his thoughts on this from a football side. Good morning, David. Thank you so much for joining us. So what's your assessment of the situation? Gary Lineker tweets something which some people thought was inappropriate. Others thought he was speaking what they wanted to hear. He has a week off football. He's back on this weekend, and the BBC are going to look at social media policy. What else do we take from it?
Good morning, Bev and Andrew. I mean, firstly, what a mess. I mean, when I looked at this developing story from a human rights perspective, first of all, I do agree with some of what Gary Lineker said. But the question I had was, why was it being blown into an issue of human rights, freedom of speech, left versus the right, when it really, to me, certainly isn't that. When I was at Leeds, we had a very clear social media policy, and that's nearly 10 years ago now, and that policy covered issues of people saying, including players saying things on social media that were not appropriate. I remember there was one young player who was sitting on the bench for a while, wasn't very happy, went onto his Twitter and said, "I'm not being played, but at least I'm being paid." And his future, eventually he left the club. So why was that something that was not properly in place, if indeed it wasn't at the time, to prevent this from being blown up? And I think it's very concerning that if that wasn't in place, you saw an avalanche of presenters, obviously backing Gary, effectively holding the BBC to hostage. So, I mean, I think, from a football perspective and from...
Well, yeah, or what, people holding their employer hostage, like a union of people coming together to, make demands of their employer who otherwise would be able to hold them to ransom by holding their wages above them. That's a weird situation to be in.
It should have simply been a matter of an employee / or a contractor performing their obligations in accordance with the contract, and it's now being blown into this.
But David, you're absolutely right. I mean, the BBC say they're going to launch an independent review into their social media guidelines. Why did it take this to do that when Gary Lineker has been breaching what Tim Davie clearly thinks is the guidelines for years? I went back...
It's interesting that these two say they would present Match of the Day for 1/10 of the fee, whereas Lineker would probably refuse to present anything on GB News for twice his fee. I mean, I don't know whether that's true, but if I was in Gary's position, I would certainly not take any amount of money to present anything on GB News. I would not mind going on GB News to debate, right? If they were to set up a debate, I'd be happy to go on, like Aaron Bastani, Michael Walker, Pig and Tea Break, who's been a guest on the stream. That's Jude. He's been on GB News to engage in debate, and I would be happy to do that, but I would not want to present anything on GB News just because of the platform that it is. But if they want to bring me on and debate somebody, I wouldn't mind doing it. Believe it or not, we don't want to hear our government is using fascist rhetoric, but the fact of the matter is it's happening, so we have to talk about it. Yeah, exactly, 100%. 100%. Extremely relevant? Let's have a look, JDM. Hope that it is. Remember the rule, middle class and care about inequality equals champagne socialist, working class and care about inequality equals politics of Henry. Yes, 100%, every single time, always the case.
We were finding controversies involving Lineker in 2016. This is, as I said at the beginning of the programme, it's just a fig leaf to cover the fact the BBC have marched up the top of the hill, and like the Grand Old Duke of York, they've marched straight back down again.
Absolutely. I mean, why was this not dealt with before? I'm sure there are policies. We've all worked with the BBC. I've worked with the BBC on various programmes like Panorama. We know about the impartiality. Why was this in the first place allowed to happen? Why were other presenters allowed to join him and effectively hold the sports programme into hostage? Something that shouldn't, I don't think, happen again.
Well, yeah, it's called a fucking strike. It's literally them engaging in, labour. I hate to call it labour organising because they're fucking millionaires. Like, I don't really care about, them wanting to hold their, the money that they earn to be a part of any kind of discussions. But they came together and said, our employer is in the wrong and we're withdrawing our labour to do so, right? They're valuable labour, apparently, given the amount of money that they get paid, and not, amusingly, and not on any issue of any sort of self-centered issue around pay, but around the defense of fucking refugees and migrants. And again, I hate the assumption that's been gone on throughout the entirety of all of the content we've watched on this, is that somehow people believe that the social media guidelines are wrong. And I'm like, no, it's fine. Like, why is it that these people fundamentally believe that people should be held, ransom about what they can and can't say based on their employer? But it can't be the other way around, based on the employee to the employer. It can't hold the employer to ransom for some reason. Let's say, well, they've just accepted as read. Well, actually, now that someone who we disagree with had said something on social media, now we're going to say that there needs to be more rules about social media impartiality. When he was criticising Corbyn, fine. Alan Sugar criticising Corbyn, fine, right? Andrew Neil tweeting anything, fine. Having a far-right newspaper that he chairs, absolutely fine. No, Gary Lineker says something about refugees. Now we need to have a discussion. The rules need to change. No, but the rules were fine. They are still fine. The issue here is that Gary Lineker should never have been suspended, and this whole kerfuffle would have been avoided in the first place.
It's very, very worrying, and it really isn't one about human rights, I don't believe, or free speech. It's the focus really should be on the football and not the pundits.
Well, when you say it's not about freedom of speech, how do you draw that conclusion, David? Because what's happened here, he was silenced for saying something that was controversial, and now he's back. This is surely about freedom of speech. It almost doesn't matter, does it, what he said? Like Jacob Rees-Mogg said at the start of the show, we live in a world where we are free to express our opinions, even if people don't like it.
Well, I don't know. Obviously, I'm not there with the internal workings of the BBC, but I'm not sure that he's back there because they're defending the values of freedom of speech. He's back there because, of course, he calls it effectively a walkout and a destruction of the sports programming, and they didn't know how to go forward. So for me, it's not.
I mean, I would be open myself to a massive amount of abuse going on GB News as a trans person, but you guys don't see the comments that I delete on my regular YouTube channel, so I get that anyway. Like, I'm a trans person who wants to have a public, like, social media facing like role, whatever it is, and that's just part and parcel of it. Obviously, it shouldn't be. I don't like that it is, but I am accepting that if I want to become a large social media figure who makes their money off of YouTube and Twitch, that's going to happen. So I have developed the skin that's thick enough. Are sports presenters to be included in the essential workers who aren't allowed to strike if the Tories get their way? Apparently so. The two heads of the Labour movement, doctors and sports presenters.
It's not an issue of free speech. No one's saying to him he can't say what he wants elsewhere. I think the problem that you've got with him, as you have with other contractors, is that on his Twitter account it doesn't say he's an employee of the BBC or not, or a contractor. That little phrase that we all see for opinions my own. And I think that's something that BBC really did fail on, because why is it? As I think some of your presenters said earlier on, he's very much linked with the BBC, rightly or wrongly in our minds. And when you see him say something, it's
no, he's linked to me with the England football team. In 2014, the Daily Mail had to pay damages to Kirsten Farage after Pearce falsely claimed in a column that she had been a mistress of Nigel Farage, the then leader of UKIP, while he was still married to his first wife. In May 2018, the Daily Mail paid $11,000 towards the legal costs of the writer Kate Maltby after the publication of an article by Pearce about the claims of sexual harassment Maltby made against the politician Tammy Cream. Jesus Christ. There's no fucking low these people won't sing to, is there? Minimum public broadcast service levels.
You almost believe yourself that it's a BBC statement, even though it isn't. So that's probably our mistake in thinking that.
And that's, of course, David, why his remarks get such a wide traction, because he is the embodiment of the BBC. He's been there so long. He's part of the fabric and the furniture.
Well, absolutely. And I think the other thing, I think it was Nana at the weekend made a comment about the consistency in which the BBC needs to put in place their approach to social media activities by their presenters. If they're going to have this approach with one, they need to have the same consistent approach with all the others. Otherwise, that then becomes unfair. We've all seen presenters that have lost their positions at various networks for things they said.
I think it's actually football has always been a kind of has always had an upswell of anti-capitalism involved in it. I mean, you look at the reactions from the Manchester United fans to the Glazers' takeover of Manchester United, for example. I just look at any Liverpool fan. Like, these people are not like dyed-in-the-wool right-wingers, are they? Despite what the right-wing media would like to tell you about working-class people. Because it's not the case. Like, working-class people are overwhelmingly left-wing in this country. And vote overwhelmingly left-wing, and always have done and always will do. Just, working class by, the actual definition of working class, and not by wearing a flat cap and having a regional accent.
In the social media or on air, and obviously now you've got this issue with Gary Lineker, so I'm sure there'll be some presenters sitting at home somewhat feeling very hard done by.
I'm amused by the fact on Match of the Day, the Match of the Day audience this weekend, David, was up 500,000. Was that just people curious to see how good or bad it was without Lineker, or was that people tuning in thinking, good, we're not going to have all those experts droning on and on? Didn't Michael Gove say once, the Secretary of State, I'm fed up with experts? Are people fed up with experts?
Well, I think I was one of the ones that watched it, and I hadn't watched it for a very long time.
There we are.
I probably watched it to see how it would go. And I think, certainly from a football commentary perspective, sometimes there is that little bit too much. So, but it would have been nice to see some younger presenters given that opportunity to present that with the support of Gary, perhaps, to move those on. Obviously, that didn't happen. But I think, more on the football, less on the overpaid pundits, I think.
All right, so we agree on that.
I can't deal with this stuff. This is ridiculous. And again, it was Pearce was correct in his first assessment in that everyone was tuning in because they wanted to see what would happen with a match day with no pundits. And I don't think people were very impressed. They could just go on YouTube and watch the highlights from another channel if they really wanted.
Thank you, David, former Leeds United Managing Director David Hay. We've got our national reporter Ellie Costello outside Broadcasting House this morning. Hi, Ellie. So we've had this statement from the BBC just moments ago. For people who are tuning in, what did they say?
Yes, Gary Lineker is set to return to our screens this weekend. It's after a deal has been made with the BBC after what has been a
I'm tired of the sick of experts comments, bemoaning people with actual useful information, disgusting way of looking at the world. I mean, it's interesting how it kind of blows apart this kind of conservative idea of meritocracy. In the well, they actually believe in it. They actually believe in a suspicion of experts, suspicion of genuine meritocracy based upon knowledge or wisdom or education. When they fundamentally fully believe that the only meritocracy that should count is wealth. Wealth should be the only measure of meritocracy rather than level of education. And there's a fundamental suspicion of people who would get educated, get smart, get have merit, and then not turning that into money is something that they are very suspicious of. And as someone who works in sales, this suspicion of this kind of stuff, it runs really fucking deep in society. I dumbed down the way that I would talk on the phone trying to sell stuff because I knew people would be suspicious of me if I sounded like I was trying to sound smarter than I am, basically, for example. So I would, you have to turn down using things like you'd think people would want to kind of defer to expertise, for example, but people don't want to hear it when you're discussing trying to sell them stuff. They think that you're trying to confuse them. They think that they are suspicious of you being educated on an issue or having expertise on an issue. You have to get down to their level to sell them stuff, and that's what the Tories do electorally, and right-wingers do ideologically. There's a reason why the Khmer Rouge went after people who wore glasses. Well, yeah.
pretty bruising weekend for them, it must be said. This is a statement from Director General Tim Davie, who said, Gary is a valued member of the BBC, and I know how much the BBC means to Gary. I look forward to him presenting our coverage this coming weekend. He also announced that the BBC...
Yeah, Northern Ireland, like the company that I work from home for doing sales, but the company I work for is based in Northern Ireland. And people, the accent's super fucking good for sales. I'm not gonna lie, not super good accent for selling people stuff. You absolutely need to let people think they are cleverer than you to influence them. Yeah, exactly, 100%, 100%.
Will be launching an independent review into its social media guidelines with a particular focus on freelancers, which is, of course, what Gary Lineker is, outside of news and current affairs. He continued to say Gary has agreed to abide by this guidance whilst the independent review takes place. Now, Gary Lineker hasn't confirmed this himself. He has actually just been tweeting in the past few...
People don't want to be pointed out to be idiots. I'd be happy to know if I was wrong, if it meant that I was going to be right by the end of it. Instead, the main idea is to be happy being an idiot and don't educate yourself. And that's a fundamental problem that we have in our society at the moment. 100%. I've heard people prefer regional accents from low-level people but want managers to sound posher. Not true, not something I've ever experienced personally, but I could see that potentially because there's a lot of classism that comes against regional accents.
Few minutes he's been tweeting a thread on his personal Twitter page, so I'm just going to share that with you now. This is from Gary Lineker in the last few minutes. He says, after a surreal few days, I'm delighted that we have navigated our way through this. He goes on to thank the support of BBC Sport. Football is a team game. Their backing was overwhelming. He says he's presented sport on the BBC for the past 3 decades, and he's immeasurably proud to work for the BBC, and he can't wait to get back in the chair on Match of the Day on Saturday. But he does continue to stand by his comments that he made last Tuesday. He says, final thought. However difficult the past few days have been, it's
they're just doing reporting now rather than opinion, which is not what I'm here for. But yeah, good. BBC have won. Success. Like Gary Lineker not apologising, not standing down. The BBC completely backing down this issue is just absolutely. I love it. Perfect. The perfect win. And I am glad that the rightoids are moulding about it. We stand. And if you're enjoying the content, you can subscribe on Twitch for $3.99. You can become a member on YouTube for 99p. And if you don't want to spend money, that's fine. I do not expect it. You can like, you can subscribe, you can ring the bell, you can leave a comment, you can share the video with your friends. This is going to be a future YouTube segment, so please do that. Yeah, we win. Victory.